Good evening, everyone. Better?
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Kaur. So I'm here on behalf of AHF, of course. I've been working with AHF for a decade now. And I'm here to dispel some myths about meningitis and to basically provide any information and education that you may have, because it's quite a confusing thing, and not only to the public at large, but it's also very confusing to the providers as to what we need to do regarding this. So there are my slides, and this is about meningococcal meningitis. So all this came to light, especially here for us in Los Angeles, is when on April 14th this month, a 33-year-old healthy, mark the word healthy, MSM gay man, resident of West Hollywood, died 4 days after being diagnosed with meningitis. Mark the 2 words, he was healthy and he died in 4 days. So on looking back, tracking, we also found that in December there had been 2 more deaths, and both of them were in gay men. One for sure in gay men, the other is questionable, I wouldn't know entirely about it, but so another gay man, 30-year-old resident of downtown Los Angeles, died on December 16th. His partner had this to say. His sickness started very suddenly on Friday the 14th. This is December, this is before Christmas. Late in the evening, he called me like at midnight, said he had started throwing up, and by Saturday night, he was unresponsive on his phone, and Sunday 16th, he was passed away. So this is how it strikes, and this is the rapidity of what things happen. The second case was actually a person in Chula Vista, and so he was actually a 30-year-old San Diego State University student who lived in Chula Vista, and he also died of the same disease, meningococcal meningitis, on December 10th. So on March 16th, we found that there was yet another man, 39-year-old, his orientation is not known, and he also died of meningococcal disease. This week, this is reported in the papers, I picked it up from the papers, and San Diego health officials are checking to see if the case might be linked to the outbreak illness in Tijuana, and the unidentified man is the second man to die of the disease in the region in 4 months. So this is yet another case. So let's talk a little bit about Tijuana outbreak. You know, it's in our backyard, it's not too far from here. So 17 people have caught the meningococcal disease since January 4th, and 5 of the 17 have died. I do not know at this point if they're labeling this as an outbreak, but we don't know who actually did the serotyping. So it looks like California Public Health Department might be helping them out to see where they stand with this. But so based on this, so these are some of the latest statistics, and they could be a little bit off because they were I think we collected them yesterday. That since November there have been 25. Since November there are 13 cases so far, and 4 have been in gay men. 2 are fatal. The usual activity of meningococcal in our area is about 25 cases a year. So you can imagine that if 13 have already happened in the first 4 months, we're progressing at a slightly higher rate than normal. Next slide. There were 2 cases in Orange County that were diagnosed. One was, I think, in a child, one was in a girl. They were not in the MSM population, but I just want to point out the way it struck, and this girl, who's actually the daughter of a firefighter, has lost all 4 limbs. She has no legs and no arms, and she's being treated for burns. Burns not because of burns, not because of the fire department that her father works for, but burns because of the skin necrosis that happened because of meningococcal disease. And so let's talk about the New York outbreak. And this is the big furor today as to are these 2 cases, are these 2 higher incidents or outbreaks, are they connected? So what happened in New York is that from 2010 to 2013, and that's a period of 3 years, it was found that 22 men were diagnosed with meningococcal meningitis, out of which 7 died. So this is a busy slide, and I definitely don't want you to read all of this, but I just want to point out that on March 6th, the health department issued new recommendations against invasive meningococcal disease, and they said that any individual's meningitis can come on quickly, and the disease is fatal, so be treated right away. And vaccinations are now advised for men regardless of HIV status who have intimate contact with other men through a website, digital application, or at a bar or at a party. Now this is, I would want you to focus on the date. This is as late as March 2013, when already many deaths have happened from 2010 to 2013. In September 2012, they put on a health alert for all gay men who had HIV, because they thought that people with HIV were at a high risk for meningococcal meningitis, but they expanded the alert in March of this year to all gay men with the caveat that they did go to parties or met up with people at websites or went to gay bars. So the health alert and the health alert was expanded later on. So this is something I picked up from the newspaper not too long ago, maybe I think today, that there were a total of 13 known cases of bacterial meningitis last year, triple of 2011. 4 cases in January to March of this year. This is New York, so it's not ending there. Normally people think of an outbreak as a lot of people getting sick at one point in time, but here the number of cases is much higher than we normally expect. This is Dr. Verma, who is from the New York Public Health Department. The rate of meningitis in gay men in New York City has spiked to 60 times higher than the straight counterparts. Last fall, health officials advised vaccination in some HIV-positive men, but they expanded the recommendations to all, to gay men, regardless of their HIV status. Next slide, please. So I found this very interesting alert from the California Public Health Department, and I want to look at the date. So this is as early as December 2012. So this is the California Health Department, and you can go online and look it up. But this is a clinician health advisory. Meningococcal vaccination recommends in men who have sex with men in December 2012. So looks like they were already anticipating that this would happen. Although the word didn't really get out to the public at large, I think it was at that time meant just for the medical personnel and the clinicians as to watch out. In reality, I don't know whether this happened or not, but the Public Health Department had put out an alert in December regarding meningococcal vaccinations.
So what was the recommendation?
So again, coming to what is meningitis, it's the infection and inflammation, I beg your pardon, it's infection and inflammation of the covering of the brain and spinal cord. It's impossible to tell by symptoms alone if the meningitis is caused by a virus, bacterium, or more rarely a fungus or a parasite. So there, the spinal meningitis that you're talking about was fungal. This is bacterial. And not just one bacteria, there's many bacteria that cause meningitis, and meningococci is one of them. And so bacterial meningitis is more severe and needs more urgent treatment for the patient. One type of bacterial meningitis is known as this one, and it's caused by bacterium Neisseria meningitidis. Next slide. So what is meningococcus? It's a bacteria, that's the name. It causes 2 life-threatening diseases. Either it can cause a meningococcal meningitis, or worse, in fact, much worse, is it causes a bloodstream infection, which is called bacteremia or septicemia, when the bacteria is actually floating in your bloodstream and seeding and going everywhere. And there are some isolated cases which, it could wherever, if it seeds certain places in your body, it could seed your joints, your conjunctiva, the covering of your heart, and you can get infections elsewhere. Next slide. So I do want you to remember that all meningitis is not meningococcal, and meningococcal does not only cause meningitis. So, and that's where some of the confusion arises, and everybody's thinking, maybe I got the meningococcus, and maybe, did I get the meningitis, and, or if I have the meningitis, is it just meningococcal? So these are two not mutually exclusive. Next slide. So let's look at the epidemiology. Meningococcal meningitis, meningococcal disease, which we call invasive disease, it can be isolated in sporadic cases. It can occur in institutions or community-based outbreaks. It can have large epidemics. We know of some large epidemics all over the world. And every year in the United States, approximately 2,500 people are infected and 300 die from the disease. So that's the natural occurrence of the disease. Next slide. So who can get the disease? Anyone can get basically meningococcal meningitis. Some people are more prone to get it, but almost anybody could get it. As you saw the cases in Los Angeles, they were healthy young men. It's carried by 5 to 10% of the population, and this is something I want to stress here because I want to convey the correct meaning of the term. When you say carrier state, it's people walking in the street could harbor it in their nasopharynx and their oropharyngeal secretions in their nasopharynx. It can sit there and they have no manifestation of disease. They're not asymptomatic. And this is how the bacteria has learned to live over the ages. Humans are the only known reservoir of the disease. It doesn't exist in animals. It's not a zoonotic disease. It doesn't come from the environment. So it has to live somewhere. And this is where it lives. So 5 to 10% of the population, and we talk population at large, I mean all comers, that's where it lives. And then in time, then it gets carried from one person to the other, and then when it finds a selective group, the transmission rate increases, the colonization increases, and then some people come down with disease, and then there's more shedding. At times of outbreaks and epidemics, the carriage rate goes much higher than this. And of course, it's a leading cause of bacterial meningitis in children 2 to 18 years of age. So anybody can get that disease. Children are more vulnerable, adolescents are more vulnerable. So who is at risk? Household contacts of a person known to have had this disease are more at risk. Immunocompromised people, people traveling to other parts of the world where meningococcal meningitis is prevalent, endemic regions, sub-Saharan Africa, adolescents such as first-year college student dorms, again because of the risk of transmission. Crowding, spending time with each other. Next slide. So I hastily put this slide, and I have to say that some of you may question, from the time that I'm exposed, or I was exposed to somebody, how soon can I get the disease? In traditional terms, that's what we call as the incubation period. So time to disease would be 2 to 7 days. That's the problem. The transmission may be low. It may be, a background rate in a population. But when it does strike, it moves very rapidly. So as you saw from the cases, in 48 to 72 hours, people were dead from being healthy. So incubation period or time to disease is 2 to 7 days. The mortality rate, I do want to stress, everybody heard about the 10 to 15%. That's with antibiotics. Without antibiotics, the mortality is 100% of meningococcal meningitis. So with antibiotic, 10 to 15%. And then there's long-term sequelae or long-term effects in these survivors as well. And I can elaborate that a little further. So some people have learning disabilities, some people have paralysis, some people will lose their digits, arms and legs, and some people will have deafness. And so there's all kinds of bad things that happen in about 15 to 20% of the survivors. Next slide. So these are some of the symptoms of meningitis. Fever. Notably, this is high fever. It's not 99, or 100. It's more than 101 degrees Fahrenheit. And the thing I want to stress out that it comes on suddenly. So if you're well in the morning, and by night you're having a fever of 101, don't sit at home. So it's high fever, coming on quickly. There's a headache. You cannot miss the headache. It's severe. And then there's drowsiness or confusion. As you saw in the second case that we presented, the partner, he said he couldn't even talk to his partner on the phone. So they're not thinking right. And then neck stiffness and joint pains. Now, neck stiffness is another thing. I won't rely too much on the neck stiffness because it's traditionally picked up by the medical personnel. When you go to a doctor, they're going to check your neck flexibility to see if you have meningitis, and that's the sign that the meningitis is present. So the people who are having this disease may not be able to say, oh, I have neck stiffness. This is just for the medical personnel to be on the lookout. Quickly, EMT people, is the neck stiff? Of course, then treat them for meningitis. So, and then rash, purple spots and bruises. Again, the rash, do not pay too much attention to the rash. Why? Because it comes on later. by the time the rash comes on, it's too late. So you should be worried more about the fever and headache. And so, people may ask me, of course, it's the flu that's going around, and that's the bad thing. Many people confuse it with the flu and do not do not seek medical advice because they think it's the flu. At this point, if you're MSN, gay, you think you're at high risk, if you have a high fever, 101, and a headache, time to go. And of course, because there's a meningitis, there's dislike of bright lights, which we call photophobia, and then of course vomiting and nausea vomiting. I want to stress out the vomiting a little bit because of what happened in the second case. R.J. Spoon's partner said he woke up one night to find Spoon vomiting. Spoon's symptoms puzzled doctors until it was too late, he said. We went to the hospital, and the first thing they said, it was a drug overdose. So just vomiting, it's bland enough just to confuse the medical personnel as well. That is why we're holding this talk, not just for people at large, but also for the medical personnel to be alert to this. So he said that they said it was a drug overdose, then they said it was extremely advanced HIV, which is not the case, it was negative, and before that I forgot to put in there, they said it was actually food poisoning. So from food poisoning to drug overdose to advanced HIV to meningococcal death. How does that happen? It happens when people are not on the lookout, if people are not primed to expect it. That's what happens. So it was so fast that everybody thought it was food poisoning. It was only after the fact we were made aware of the meningitis situation in New York, and 2 days after he passed away when the CDC concluded that it was actually meningococcal meningitis. So I was brought into the health department, inoculated. I had questions that were not answered, but they said it was such a rare thing, a rare case. They had not had a lot of information on it. So this is the medical personnel who say that they do not have a lot of information on it. And that's not far from the truth. It's a rare disease. It's a rare disease. We are seeing an enhanced attack rate at this point, but it's a rare disease if you look at the overall general population. So I do want to bring you to the point, how do you catch it? Either it is long-term non-intimate contact. Long-term non-intimate contact. You spent the night with somebody, you're in a dorm, you're in a school, daycare centers, military recruits, because they share barracks. So if it's non-intimate contact, time has to be there. If it's instant, then it has to be intimate transfer, like kissing or sexual contact, or procedural contact. We discussed occupational transmission of a patient who was actually found, and the EMT people came and they gave him a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And obviously there's no masks over there. So, they are at risk, and they came down with meningococcal disease. The respiratory therapist who performed suction and put in the endotracheal tube, or a tube to help with the breathing, they came down with the disease. The police people who helped him turn over and take him to the hospital, they came down with disease. So if there's intimate contact, then time doesn't matter. If it's non-intimate contact, then the time matters. So this is the risk to household contacts. Who are the people at risk? So there have got to be household members, there have got to be child care contacts, exposure to the index patient, and so kissing, sharing toothbrushes, utensils, cigarettes, and straws would be there. Sharing or sleeping places, dorms, barracks, and healthcare workers. I have to qualify that. Healthcare workers who came in intimate contact with the patient's secretions, they are at risk. If you feel you've shared a cup with someone, you'd be at high risk, or if you cough within 3 feet of someone for a prolonged period of time, then you'd be at risk. People in the same household, roommates, and intimate sexual contacts are those who are typically more at risk. So who needs the vaccine? So, there's children at risk, adolescents prior to high school and college, people who have complement deficiencies, like an immune deficiency, and people who don't have a spleen, or have a spleen that doesn't function because they do not have the capacity to fight infections. So they would need a vaccine. Travelers to high-risk areas. I want to point out high-risk areas. There are certain geographical regions in the world, in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, where there's a high endemic rate. I think it's about 500 times higher than what we have. The transmission rate is higher, their parent rate is higher. They have about 1,000 deaths and 50,000 infections. So if somebody is going there, they need to protect themselves with a vaccine. So who should get the vaccine? It's routinely for 11 to 12-year-olds who are actually entering high school, and or if they didn't get it that time, then at least 15 years of age. All schools are going to need proof of vaccine. And persistent complement deficiency, routinely working with the meningococcal in laboratories, the people who are actually culturing and subculturing and typing these strains, and travelers to resident. Next, that's a little bit of an overlap.
How long does the vaccine last?
Vaccine lasts. It was initially thought that the vaccine would provide a good cover for about 4 or 5 years plus, but actually they've done studies now, and so it's about 3 years, 5 years max.
From the time that you are vaccinated, how long does it take to become quote-unquote immune?
Very, very good point again, very good and very practical point. It takes about 10 days to 2 weeks. So if somebody were to go to, let's say if I were going out of the country and I wanted to get a vaccine, I should take it 2 weeks in advance, because 10 days is going to provoke an immune response, so a couple of days here and there. So basically 10 days to 2 weeks, you're protected.
Any side effects of the vaccine?
The side of the vaccine, yes, very important point again, they are minimal. They are minimal. There's the downside. There's going to be side effects with every vaccine. Nothing comes, without side effects. So there's redness at the site, pain, mild fever, occasionally a little bit of vomiting, but nothing more than that. I do want to stress out that there are some things that may happen that have been associated with, not caused by, but associated with this vaccine. And there are certain paralytic conditions which have been associated with, and the risk of them is very, very low. But more than 50% of the people who get the vaccine will just come down with these very minor side effects.